Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, and we're sitting down to talk about the latest Phil Spencer interview. This one comes from Destin Legary, good buddy of mine. He's been here on the channel before. Very happy for him. He just went independent, so go ahead, check out the interview, link down below, support my man. But we got a lot of answers from Phil Spencer on the future of the Xbox business. And if there's one thing I've always asked for from Xbox, it's just consistent messaging, clarifying any misunderstandings, and marching forward with everyone basically saying a similar thing. Because what happens with Xbox a lot is you'll have Satya Nadella saying one thing, you'll have Amy Hood saying another, Tim Stewart saying something else, Matt Booty saying something else, you'll have Sarah Bond with her own thoughts, Phil with his own thoughts. And so ultimately it feels like mixed messaging. You don't really know where everyone fully stands. Like, are they united? Are they battling? Are they all trying to win over the consumer in different ways? You never really know. So marching forward here with this information, I think Phil cleared up a lot of misconceptions about the Xbox business, and there's no going back now, right? As I've talked about with previous Xbox videos, this multi-platform push is in full effect, and Phil has really firmed up some of the rumors that have been surrounding Xbox as of late. So we're going to dive into this interview piece by piece, going to offer my thoughts, and we also have an article from The Verge by Tom Warren, which suggests that Xbox has much more happening beyond June. A lot of people get confused with my Xbox coverage, and I get it because the internet exists in black and white, and I find myself in an area of nuance. I love Xbox's software push, and I've said that many times before, but I guess I should really make it extremely clear because I see people get extremely upset with me. But the software push is awesome. This year for Xbox fans will be amazing. When it comes to hardware, though, I can't stand it. And so we do get some good answers on hardware here, I think at least. And so we'll talk about both of them as well as what's coming up soon. So ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here, you're into what's going on across the games industry, we got a PlayStation video coming out later this week. Be sure to subscribe, lock in here. Let's start off at the top with what's going on with shipping games on multiple platforms. Phil says, quote, "We are finding that our games shipping on multiple platforms is a good thing for Xbox. It makes Xbox stronger. It lets us do the things like we did with the showcase, such as Developer Direct, and gives the teams the time that they need," end quote. And he confirms that there are games that have shipped and just won't reach other platforms. Others, they're going to wait and see, but they want their games to be played in places that people are going to play, and he's documented stats like Asia being their fastest growing region, and also their fastest growing hours on their platform across the board is actually on cloud. But the biggest takeaway was when Destin asked about Starfield, and Phil did say that Starfield has the potential to leave Xbox. He said he didn't want to put the gates up around any game, really. If they wanted to go multi-plat, they could. So it sounds like Xbox and their philosophy has shifted from, we're not going to tell you you're going to do this, but developers have the option to go ahead and pursue that. And since developers typically want their game, they're artists, right? They want their games to be played by as many people as possible, are more than likely going to bring their games over to PlayStation, or who knows, maybe even a Switch 2 now. Starfield has long been on my list of games that will leave Xbox sooner rather than later. If you asked me in 2023, of course, my answer would have been completely different at that point. But now when you see what happened with 2024 and the numbers for Starfield that dwindled off, that game is in desperate need of a shot in the arm if Todd Howard's going to live up to his promise of annual updates for the game. And I know, of course, those updates will slow down, but right now, if you look at the Steam player base, even the Xbox player base, although with Xbox, in fairness, we don't have numbers, but we know it's not a highly played game, quite like it was originally leading into Starfield Shattered Space. Again, that DLC really hurt the hopes of a lot of people, so I think a new shot in the arm would be bringing this to multiple platforms and announcing the next expansion alongside it. And I think that could get people at least looking in Starfield's direction, especially PlayStation fans who have held out and said, I'll play it in its best possible version when it arrives on PS5 Pro. But when Xbox loses their exclusives, a lot of people have argued, myself as well, that they're going to lose their brand identity. What exactly is Xbox's identity if they're going to give up Halo, Gears, and new IP that they built their box around in, like Starfield? Well, Phil in this interview claimed that the identity is always going to continue to evolve, and in a sense, that sort of change has always been part of their identity with things such as cross-entitlement, kind of suggesting like, hey, we were letting you play your games everywhere already, starting with Xbox and PC. And he thinks actually that the industry needs to share their identity to knock down the current business challenges that everyone is facing. Now, I have some thoughts on this, but to get into that, one other thing that Phil said in this interview that caught my ear was when he responded to what Satya Nadella said which was that they are at Microsoft redefining what it means to be an Xbox fan. And Phil stating, I don't know what Satya's feelings are on being an Xbox fan, but Phil says he doesn't feel it's up to him to define that, and everyone has their own approach to the ecosystem. And I did find that as an interesting way of thinking about it, because if you asked me, what does it mean to be, I guess, an Xbox fan, or why am I an Xbox fan, it would be because of the weird, zany exclusives that started back on the original Xbox. Like, for God's sakes, I could pull off this shelf here, in this Xbox category, like a dozen random games that are absolutely absurd that would only have existed thanks to Xbox. And I feel like that spirit has continued on with games like even Hi-Fi Rush. When that came out, I was like, this is the Xbox exclusive that I know and love and grew up on. For me, it was everything from like Oddworld Munch's Odyssey to Death Row to Blinks the Time Sweeper to Voodoo Vince, and the list goes on. Just these random, absurd, amazing video games that I feel like Xbox is known for, and that heritage would continue. Let's rotate the shelf of magic again, all the way to the Xbox 360, where you had even dozens of more crazy Xbox exclusives there. It was basically a higher budget version of the original Xbox. So you had that same weird and zany sort of library, but with bigger budgets, bigger games, so you got just crazier combinations. It was awesome. So that to me is what made me an Xbox fan. And when Phil says, well, it's always been part of our identity to kind of grow our ecosystem, put our games everywhere, I'm like, yes, but we all know it was within reason. And I'll go back to what I've always said about the economics of game development, is that while I get where Phil's coming from, and I think it's a fair point that, hey, the industry needs to evolve and start breaking down these walled gardens to sell more copies, it's chasing this arbitrary sense of growth that's going to undoubtedly hit a brick wall again, because eventually you're going to be everywhere. You're going to be on phones, TVs, you're going to be on consoles, you're going to be on PC, you're going to be everywhere, right? But games, people are already paying what they don't realize is a cheap price for them. Games used to be $100 back then. They got cheaper. Now we're seeing rumors of like GTA 6 maybe charging $100 in the industry, hoping they can do that so everyone can move their prices up again. And while I understand letting artists be artists, I do think the root of the industry's economic issues goes down to development timelines. And that will, of course, exponentially inflate your budget. Of course, marketing goes into that as well. I'm just talking development fees. And there is a way to shrink down costs, and it's by making smaller, tighter games that people actually have time to complete multiple of in a year. And especially if you're Xbox, who we see how many games they're putting out this year. That's why I find it all a little bit strange, because Xbox delayed Avowed last year because they said, you know, we want you to be able to play more games and in respect for your library. And then they proceed to go, here's Ninja Gaiden 2 Black. In March, you have Fragpunk and Atomfall on Game Pass. And then, of course, April is going to be really interesting because you have South of Midnight, you have Claire Obscure, Expedition 33. May, you have Doom the Dark Ages. And as we'll get into, we also have a lot of rumored titles for Xbox still unconfirmed for 2025, but again, heavily rumored. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So as much as I do like Phil, I do think he has a habit of kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth a little bit. And so he's saying one thing, doing another. And I think it's the same thing with like Avowed, again, with that delay, like saying one thing, doing another, where I find it hard to believe that, you know, this idea of this dramatic shift in the Xbox identity is, quote, always what it's been. Like, this is what we've always been doing. Like, there's a difference between in 2017 you saying, or 2016 you saying, we're bringing Xbox games to PC. Like, that was an interesting step because Windows was there, so it kind of made sense for Xbox and Windows to come together. Like, that ecosystem makes sense. But for Xbox to say, hey, it's part of our identity to bring our games everywhere, so we're going to put these highly touted exclusives on PlayStation, it's like, I wish he would have just outright said, like, we need to sell more games. And he kind of says it a little bit with the current business challenge, but he's kind of saying that other companies are going to face the challenges they're facing. And I think PlayStation might be up next. We'll talk about that in our upcoming video, but their games are selling at an interesting clip where they have a lot of hardware out there. They have a lot of games out there. And now they're in a stalling period where all of their studios are reloading to fire off for probably a new generation. Because at the end of the day, these decisions are what will define Phil Spencer's legacy and in turn Xbox. And the reason it is important to note that is because this will be the man who's known for either saving or killing Xbox as we know it. But right now, the headlines are in Phil's favor. He could be clairvoyant, as it says Microsoft was the #1 games publisher in the world last month, with $465 million spent on Microsoft games over December across PlayStation, PC, and Xbox. And this was according to the data firm Ampere, and it does include the sales for both Black Ops 6 and Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. But interestingly, the stat shows that 64% of consumer spending on Microsoft titles in December was on PlayStation, driven by Call of Duty. Now, I don't want to lean Omega into these numbers because we know Call of Duty is going to inflate everything. It's such a powerful seller, but it's showing that Xbox is cashing in big time through this transition. And despite people like me and others out there discussing heavily, what you've got here is a company making more money than they ever have. And as I've said multiple times, 2025 will be a year Xbox makes possibly their most money ever when it comes to selling software. Phil also defended the Xbox Series S. This has long been a target this generation, saying it's underpowered. I've always argued it comes down to developer talent. Many developers have said the same thing. But one thing that was interesting that I'd never considered before is how the Series S does have comparable specs to a Steam Deck or to a ROG Ally even, where they're floating around the same area. Obviously not exactly the same, but Phil says that over time, especially, the Series S will be a great target because it's one of those moments where one size fits all. Like, oh, you can work it on the Steam Deck, then maybe you could work it on your Series S. At least that's sort of the mentality he seemed to be suggesting. But in all of this, he did state that there's no plans to drop the parity clause for the Xbox Series S, which I thought was really interesting because Xbox has missed on 2 big games at launch because of it, in Baldur's Gate 3 and apparently Black Myth Wukong. He did defend it by saying, hey, look, Indiana Jones is a game that's pushing tech and it runs really well. And I do think that's a fair point of defense, but one thing that really sucks if you're like a core Xbox owner and you don't have the other systems is Xbox does sometimes strangely miss out on some of the biggest releases. Again, Baldur's Gate 3, them getting that game 4 or 5 months later was really a stinger, I think. And obviously as a business, they miss out on a ton of money there. But what is good beyond the big budget games is that Phil did confirm they're going to continue to invest in indie games. He says that they don't want just an industry of $200+ million games. And so he did mention that they're very proud of the amount of games they've just funded with Game Pass deals. That's something that I've heard a lot about in the indie scene, is that just Game Pass can provide you all of the development funding that you really need, where companies are kind of like zeroed out going into launch, and it's kind of raw profit from there. If you really strategize your game well, that's kind of where you can end up. And that's a really good position to be in, where indie projects are scaled in the way that I think AAA should kind of model themselves after, of course, just on a slightly bigger level, where, again, they're scoped in a way of less is more, smaller teams, contracting very selectively. It's a much more heavily managed process, but I think it pays out really well. But, you know, greed, money, you know what I'm talking about, right? But it's cool to see that indie is going to continue to be a focus for them. And by that, I mean like indie video games, not Indiana Jones, though I hope there is more indie, of course. But the last thing, which will bring us into the Tom Warren report, is that Phil says there are many games beyond what's been announced for 2025. We already know the run up to about May/June, but when it comes to the rest of the year, we have a lot of candidates, right? We have Fable, we have The Outer Worlds 2, Gears E-Day, Contraband, we have Clockwork Revolution. There's a lot of games. Of course, your annual Call of Duty. I'm probably forgetting some. Like, Xbox has a absurdly stacked year, and that's not even getting into the rumored ports happening this year. Gears, Halo, Starfield, Hellblade, Microsoft Flight Simulator. Like, this year, Xbox might make the most money they ever have. But Phil says that there are more games coming this year. What could those games be? Well, Tom Warren of The Verge wrote this: Microsoft's Xbox Summer Showcase will then set the stage for the rest of the year and beyond. Ninja Gaiden 4, there is one I forgot, is coming this fall, but Microsoft has also previously announced The Outer Worlds 2 and Fable are 2025 releases. It will also be interesting to see if Gears of War E-Day will make the 2025 release date I'd heard Microsoft was planning for last year. There could be some more surprises on the way too. In recent weeks, rumors have pointed toward a remaster of The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. I first heard about this remaster last year, and at the time, Microsoft was tentatively targeting a release in late spring or early summer 2025. I'm also hoping we hear more about Contraband or Clockwork Revolution at the summer showcase. So the main takeaway here is that by the halfway point in the year, we're going to likely have in our hands the Oblivion, he's calling it remaster. So now we're getting conflicting, terminology here. I just got to see this game and know what's going on. But Oblivion remaster, we're seeing Oblivion at the midpoint of the year, which I thought when this all first kind of leaked, like, oh, this is an easy holiday title. Like, go cash in your money right there. But this is going to be a midpoint game after a flurry of releases. And I'm starting to think that the goal for Xbox this year is to see what happens with Game Pass if they have monthly big releases, if they can pull that off. I mean, they'd have to get third party involved, but can they pull that off? And will it keep you engaged month after month, where maybe they don't lose subscribers with Game Pass, especially when they saw a surge through Call of Duty? So do they keep the Call of Duty subscribers? They're like, hey, every single month we got something new for you. But to see E-Day on this list, Coalition does have a habit of announcing and then a year later releasing, and Coalition has been gone for a while. The last time we saw them in a proper manner was really Hivebusters with the next gen update at the launch of the Series X. We of course also saw them show up with things like the Matrix Unreal Engine 5 demo. They did have a canceled project at one point. This team's been spinning their wheels for a while, and everyone thought they'd be working on Gears 6 because I won't spoil, but the way Gears 5 ends, you're like, yeah, there's more story to be told, but I do think they wrote themselves into a bit of a corner and a choice they did not want to make. And so they went back to the very essence of Xbox with Dom and Marcus. And speaking of the essence of Xbox, it was then confirmed that People Can Fly, who developed Gears of War Judgment, is co-developing alongside the Coalition for this project, which I think is great. That's getting in touch with the Xbox heritage. Same thing with Ninja Gaiden, bringing back Team Ninja, tapping Platinum Games, who was very openly selling themselves out to Xbox, on the shoulder and seeing what they could do. Bringing this together and then completely funding the game is exactly what I want to see from Xbox to make these impossible games possible. Something like a Ninja Gaiden 4, I never really expected. Gears is awesome. We expected that, but to go back to Marcus and Dom is really cool. Hopefully there is a really strong story to tell there. I only say that because obviously I love these characters, but are the stakes lowered when you know the fate of everyone because of how Gears would trend into the 5th game? I digress. There is a long list of video games that are going to come out for Xbox this year, and The Outer Worlds 2 being dated for 2025 is insane to me. This is a stacked year for them, and I think Fable can't slip either. I think if any of these three slip, it might be Gears E-Day. But does Xbox go for like the 1, 2, 3, 4 punch of like month to month? You get The Outer Worlds 2, Fable, Gears, and Call of Duty. That's an insane holiday window. That's tough to compete with. I mean, Xbox is turning into the biggest publishing label on the planet. If they're putting this many games out this year, you really got to think about it and their game plan and just how it's going to pay out in the terms of money earned. I always said that when people were like, Xbox is dying, I think people would always misunderstand what I said when Xbox is dead. It's like Xbox as you know it is dead. Xbox as the brand I grew up with and you grew up with is dead. They have completely pivoted away from that. But Xbox as a brand and a business will likely make more money than ever before. So I'm interested to see at the end of 2025 where Xbox stands, but no doubt I'll be getting more use out of my console this year. So ladies and gentlemen, let me know your thoughts on what's going on here with the business and Xbox and the interview that Destin did with Phil. I'll have it linked down below if you want to listen to the full thing. Shout out to Destin for the great interview. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will catch you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.